Why, hello there, hello there, hello there. Niiamah Ashong here, and thank you so much for letting me be a part of your journey. Today, I have, I feel like I have an opportunity, and I'm happy to share this opportunity with all of you here as we spend time with Tonya Dawn Recla. The opportunity right now, I feel is an opportunity to empty my cup, to like come in open, and to be in a place of both exchange and reception, and that's the space that I'm feeling here. Tony, I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to be having here. Uh, let's start off here with just saying I'm grateful that you're here. I'm glad to be in space with you. Thanks for making the time for us to have this conversation.
Thank you, Niiamah. It's quite a pleasure to share this time with you as well. And I think we're in for a really fabulous conversation. So folks, hold on to your seats, right? This is when creative forces align. It's nothing short of miraculous. So it's going to be a good one.
Yes, indeed. Let's start off here then, like with seeing how you're using your creativity right now. And so the way I would ask this is let us know a bit about you and the mission that you're on and how you're bringing that mission out to life.
Fabulous question. And it's multifaceted, of course, with most of us
Yes.
creators, right? It's like we can't just follow that single line, which I think it lies at the heart of creation itself, is the multidimensional nature of it. And so we run the Superpower Network, which is ranked in the top 1.5% of podcasts globally, and it's got a fabulous story behind it. But really, podcasting is fabulous and it's wonderful, but it's a tool, and it was a really necessary tool for us because our work was so obscure that it was difficult to kind of use the traditional marketing angles, and you can't really use Google Analytics to find consciousness levels in people, and so we had to get really creative because we work in spaces in the energetic spaces, and when I talk about this, I mean like energetic communication and sensitization that my husband and I taught to counterintelligence agents when we were agents and teaching at the counterintel special agent course. So this isn't just flighty, fluffy stuff, right? And it's been taught in everything from biotech to corporate to academia, but it's weird, right? It's a weird concept, and it's kind of like talking about the stuff that we never talk about. Um, we noticed it when we got into business that all successful business people had some element of, well, all successful fulfilled business individuals had some element of spirituality, religion, some sort of meditative, contemplative stillness practice. Regardless of what you call it, they communed with nature. There was something they were doing to fortify themselves, so and then pouring that into the business, but they weren't talking about it. And so back in what 2015, 2016, we started just asking them to talk about it, right? We started the network with my show, and the question was, what are your superpowers? Because they all on some level had sort of grappled with this themselves, but in the dialogues, what was being publicly kind of presented, it was about business, and it was the transactional stuff. We were giving people what we thought they wanted, not what we really needed to be talking about to paint the full picture. And we found that the reason they don't is because there was pressure not to. They were afraid to, honestly. In certain sectors, you just didn't. In counter intel, you certainly didn't go around talking about being an intuitive or being predisposed to empathy or mind reading or whatever your abilities were that were undeniable in your personal life. You didn't discuss them in certain circles. And so what we found was when we gave people a place to talk and kind of the safety in numbers concept, you'd be amazed at what people knew about themselves and knew about others and what they were applying to their lives, to their businesses that was helping them be successful. They just didn't have a place to talk about it. And almost every interview in the early years, well, even now to a large extent, as soon as the recording goes off, people disclose to me, they're like, I don't get to talk about this with anybody else, right? And it's like, well, why not? like when are you going to? And so I really love the concept of being an outlier, because that's what it takes sometimes is to be able to say, like, I get that this isn't popular and that people don't really know about it and it might be a little intimidating, but it is what's going on for me. And being okay discussing that, and I can certainly understand the trepidation. And so the podcast really served as a mechanism to start gathering these stories. I don't even know the hundreds of thousands of guests we've had, over the years, because we've had so many shows on the network. But almost every single episode, there was some form of the question, what are your superpowers? And people had an answer, right? So where are we missing this? Like, why are we not shaping a world that acknowledges our brilliance, instead of sort of what we see in social media and mass media, where the picture's a little bit dimmer than that? And so really the mission was to bring that out into the open so that we could do our work, because it was sort of a readying the market space, proving that people wanted to hear about this. And during in 2020, we went over 5 million downloads in a month. And at that point in time, we knew the model worked. We were testing a collaborative model. Our hypothesis was that collaboration will outperform the market every single time, and it does. It did for us. And so at that point in time, we shut all the tracking off. We have, the rankings are out there, but it just didn't matter to us. We needed to prove that model, to gather those stories, so that we could stand on some sort of a platform and say, hey, we are much more than we're giving ourselves credit for. And in our hearts, we know this. Um, and so kind of creating that connection between what we know to be true and how we're actually being in the world, so that we can create a world that allows us to be who we are. And it's going to take a little bit of doing, but there are many, 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 many people working for humanity in the background, who holding that space of that potentiality. And we just felt it was important to give them voice. And so that's really the kind of over the encapsulating kind of picture there. Certainly there were many, many uphills and downhills and side turns and everything else along the way, as all entrepreneurs know. But it gave us a chance to hone ourselves, right? And to look at where we needed to be forged, because you don't step on this path lightly. You say yes to that nudge, whether it's spirit or energy or God or however you name it. When you say yes to that, you're on a ride. And you better hold on, and you better be willing to let your reality reshape in front of your face multiple times. And what's so beautiful following the pandemic is that we all had that experience globally. Our reality shifted dramatically in front of our faces. Some of us were ready for that, but not everybody. And so our mission is to assist where we can, because I believe it's inevitable, right? This is where we're going. We're moving into a much more co-creative beingness position. The creative economy is emerging. We're seeing things we've never seen before, and a lot of people aren't ready, and that's for various reasons. And so we sit ready and prepared to assist in those transformations, to ease that transition for folks, and to provide the tools for how they can be, right? How do you manage your energetic system? How does our programming work, right? What happens when we start talking about the subtle arts and the vibrational levels and multidimensionality? And what does it really mean? Is it just something in the Marvel comics, or are we really in an experience that's worth talking about? And I'd say we have ample proof at this point in time to state that we're in an experience. And I don't know anybody who's come out of the pandemic without some sense of awareness that things are changing, and they're changing right along with it. And that terrifies a lot of people, and it's unnecessary. And so we stand to present a different story, so that people have somewhere else to go, to remind themselves of who they are.
Tonya, I really appreciate this here. Thank you for. I appreciate a number of different things, and you'll find with me, one of you said a couple different things that, as you were saying, I was like, I get this. One of them you talked about, like everyone had a superpower, but they just weren't talking about it. Everyone had like some kind of practice or some kind of connection with whatever spirituality, God, nature, higher. Like there was something that they were doing there, and it wasn't really being said. And I look at part of the reason why I love hitting record, is because it's because it gives a chance to allow for something new to emerge. And but you'll find in this conversation that like I will let you know what is taking place for me on the inside, and saying it out loud, because I feel that there's that component of we often compare how we think people look on the outside with how we feel on the inside, and we don't understand what's really taking place all
Mhm.
throughout. So that was, as you were saying it, there were actually a number of different areas. Do you mind if I jump off a few places based on what
Absolutely.
I was hearing here?
Please.
So uh some things were like I have some connections I need to make for you, so I'm excited for that. We'll talk about that there. um but what was really calling, there was an element of when you say yes to that nudge, like I call it like answering the calling, like like and all right, there's a few things. Let me just reflect back. One, I am just so happy we're having this conversation because you own what you're here to do and you own what you're doing, and I think that's like, uh there have been years where I have myself have played kind of tangentially, like I'm gonna be a secret agent for what it is that I'm really here on this planet to do. Let me not even say what I am here on this planet to do. Let me just say like purpose with a small p, or like, like something like that.
Mhm.
But like in experiencing it, it really feels like you have like you've taken ownership. Like this is the role we're choosing to play here, and there's a space that was we're here to be a Sherpa. We're here to like help guide when for those that are ready, and we're creating the skill sets, the proof, the infrastructure, so on and so forth, to be able to help guide people in this inevitability of where we're heading, like as a society, and overall. Am I getting some of that right there? Let me just check in and see.
Beautiful.
Yeah. The There's something I wanted to call in here because you talked about proving the model, and you talked about hypotheses, and you also said like you talked about 2015, and then you brought in like 5 years later, 2020, right? And so my understanding here is that like in 2015, y'all started the work. You chose podcasting as your platform, and you're like, we're gonna start. We have a hypothesis here, like that, and people need to know, or people will be coming in, and like, we need to be able to create the foundation for people. You jump to 2020, and I'm lucky to be talking to you years after that, but
Mhm.
I get curious about those 5 years beforehand, the 5 years where you were like building the proof. You're like, I've had thousands of conversations now, you know I'm curious about you in that space where you knew what you knew to be true, but perhaps the rest of the world at that time didn't. And the proof that you had at that time was not as abundant as thousands, maybe dozens,
Right.
but it kept going. So I've been really curious about like how about that part of the journey, and how you navigated that and kind of just stayed true to what like, I'm going to say true north, but I don't know how things evolve. So let me put it there. I'll let that question emerge, and you take it as like. So here goes the real thing that happened in those 5 years.
Yeah,
And
you're
we'll go
gonna
from there.
love this story. You're gonna
Yeah.
love this. So, okay. So we're gonna geek out a little bit, right? We're
Yes,
social
please.
scientists. We test everything. This is gonna be fun. So here was the challenge. We had, and I'll go back just even half a heartbeat because I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that I was guided. I had a moment. I had actually it was a long period of moments where I was walked through my own awakening process, and it was tumultuous and it was earth shattering and it was all of these components that everybody talks about when they have these sort of otherworldly experiences with the divine when they're ready to heed that call. And the guidance I received was awaken millions, bring everyone into the same conversation, and get everyone to work together. Clear as day, over and over and over again. And it was like, okay, no thanks. Like I don't play well with others. Like I'm not, like all of the reasons why. Right? I was a counter intel agent. Right? Like we don't even we kind of lie to ourselves. Right? So it's like what, no thanks. And so it took a little bit of nudging and like go find someone else, and many like come to Jesus talks with God that I had, and it was like, oh, and that was my reality. As weird as it was, as many people who could not understand that, as terrifying as I felt to even say that publicly. In fact, I wrote a book and I haven't even published it yet because it's like who does this, right? And that was my reality, and yet the call was so clear to me. It was like, all right, well, let's give this a shot. And so here was the conundrum. You have a brand called Superpowers. And at that time, there was no statistically significant relationship between the concept of superpowers and personal development, as according to the internet. None. If you looked up superpowers, it was comic books and nuclear power of major countries, right? That was it. Those were the only two options you had. So we when I said we couldn't rely on Google Analytics and other things, like literally there was no, like we were making something out of nothing, which is exhilarating, right? And then as creators, it's kind of what we do. But that was the challenge. And so we needed to do a number of things. And so we actually reverse engineered the process because we used the podcast to not only get the information out and all the things that I just spoke to, but we also had to get some SEO going. We had to create the content, right? Have a some way to have consistent, reliable, structured content so that the internet would start to notice it, right? And that takes time. When you're trying to create something out of nothing, it takes time. And so early on, we didn't even track the numbers for 4 years because I know myself and I wasn't going to put all this work in and think nobody's listening. And I didn't want to know. I was like, and I knew nobody was going to be listening because podcasting is extremely competitive. Even then, it's a gazillion times more competitive now. But even then, it was about a 5 year detraction sort of scenario. And it was like, that's a thankless pursuit for anybody, right? And it's a lot of work. And so if we were going to do this, we wanted to accomplish a few things. We needed to get the structured data. We also wanted to be able to offer it to other people because like we're going to put this much effort into it. We couldn't do it in the traditional ways because at that time and probably now still, most podcasts use like a production manager. They do it all themselves or something, and it's not scalable. And so we needed something that could scale. We needed duplicatability. We also needed platforms that were reliable. And prior to that, we had run a corporate counter intel firm where we vetted businesses and we knew that most businesses fail. And so we were looking out at our options of podcast platforms, and it's like not one of them um, gave us any kind of warm and fuzzy about its ability to withstand this wave. And we weren't willing to risk building on top of somebody else's platform only to have them go out of business. So we couldn't do things the way other people did things. We built everything from scratch ourselves. So we own everything. We built it all from the bottom up because we had to maintain control and we had to be able to duplicate it. So all of those components had to be taken into place. We also wanted to devise a system that could be used to train people on tech because we saw tech being such a pivotal part of people's existence moving forward. And the way to do that was we had to sort of create, we call it like the McDonald's of podcasting, where it's like we broke it down to the most simple steps so that anybody could do it. And that was the goal, is to get that perfect so that we could bring in anybody to run the network without worry and train them, right? Get them confident. Because what we found is if you can teach people like just do this little step and then do this little step, it removes that tech intimidation factor and gives people the confidence to be tech savvy, because that's ever changing, right? You can't just train somebody on a specific software because the software changes, right? And it's constantly being updated. And so what we really need to develop is a confidence um, in stepping into things and trying things that you haven't done before, right? Instilling that sort of fortitude within people. And so the whole system needed to accomplish many, 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 many things. So it was trial and error and trial and error. And we had a really great opportunity because shortly after I started my show, our daughter came to us. She was 7 at the time. And she was super cute. She goes, "So you're the founder of Superpower Experts?" And I said, "Yes, I am." "So I'm the daughter of the founder of Superpower Experts." I was like, "Yes, you are." And I'm thinking, where is this going, right? And so if I wanted to be a founder, and I was like, "Of what exactly?" She goes, "Well, like what about like Superpower Kids?" And I was like, and at the time, Superpower Experts was a coaching platform. We were also building out a collaborative coaching model. And so that's where I thought she was going with this. I'm like, "So like coaching kids?" And she goes, "Well, yeah, kind of." And I was like, "I don't want to coach kids." Like, I don't mind coaching you. I said, "But I'm not interested in, in opening that door just yet." And she goes, "Well, I would coach them. And I'm like, okay, well, what would that look like? And she goes, well, I don't know. And I said, all right. So I brought her on my show. And I was like, she has an idea. Like she's obviously her mind's going. And so I said, well, why don't you come on my show and let's talk about it? So we did a couple episodes, and what came out of it was she wanted to do a podcast. So, okay. So I look at my husband, I was like, are we going to do this? So the second show on our network was Superpower Kids. She was 7 at the time. And for her show, we tested a video concept because we wanted to see if we could create the same duplicatability with video. And hers was the only show we ended up doing that on, simply because of the logistics that went into it. We just weren't interested in muddying the process by offering that across the board. But she ran her show for, I don't know, she interviewed over 100 guests, and we were homeschooling her at the time. And so she essentially interviewed over 100 thought leaders before she ever had a school teacher. And this is really important because by the time she got plugged into those systems, she knew who she was. And so her path was completely different. She did a keynote that same year in front of 2,500 people. She wrote a book. She was 7, 8, 9. Took her 3 years, but it came out when she was 9. Best-selling book, and it was, she was another experiment, right? We wanted to see what's possible when you tell people anything's possible, right? When you raise children in an environment that gives them the resources, gives them the privilege to be able to do it, but also the confirmation that you can, right? Never suggesting to her that because she's a kid she couldn't do what we were doing. And it allowed us to perfect the process even more. So not only was the production process duplicatable, but the interviewing process was. So we trained her because part of our production process, because we needed the structured data, we reverse engineered the interview itself. What we found was that a lot of folks in the podcast space would do these beautiful interviews, but then somebody had to go back and kind of figure out how to structure the data. Like, what was the point of the conversation? What was the keyword? Like, did you mention the keyword enough times? Right, all of the components that the internet requires. We reverse engineered it and structured the interview in such a way that it had enough structure to it, but enough space for creativity and intuitive flow. And she helped us perfect that, because if a 7-year-old could do, and she did, she was able to hold the container. She'd craft her messages ahead of time. We had a whole set of keywords that we were targeting, so that we could get this relationship between superpowers and personal development connected. And she was able to hold all of that with a timer and still engage with the guests in a very real way. And at that point in time, we knew we could then duplicate that with other folks.
So
All
Tonya,
of that was going on at that time.
I'm gonna pause really quickly because like the story is not complete. I want to come in more. And like I need to just I'm gonna process some of it as it's coming
Yeah,
through. You good with that?
absolutely.
Okay. So firstly, thank you. I guess a thank you here. Um, let's take where we've gotten to like with up until this point here. And if there was, let's do one thing. Let's start off here with just like digesting some of what you put in here. If there was like 2 or 3 takeaways or 2 or 3 like insights or 2 or 3 things that you're like, hey, like there's a story, and here goes some of the things that at least for you felt like important in that moment. We're always going to grab what is most meaningful for us in the moment. If there were 2 or 3 things that felt really important to you in terms of what you just shared with us, what would those three things be?
I would say the accessibility, the duplicatability, and the collaborative impact of what we were seeing. Those are the 3 elements that I think were the most crucial for us to wrap our minds around. And they came about in different ways, as I illustrated, but all 3 were essential for the mission at hand.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm feeling that. I have a question for you then with this. You talked about structured data and now, and like, I recognize how much I want to know, like, okay, if I was going to go out there right now and structure my data, because I've been doing podcasts on and off since 2015 myself, never once thought about structured data, never once thought about like, I created duplicative systems, but like for me to get support from other people.
Mhm.
And my general thing was, I just want to be able to record a podcast and walk away and know that it's all going to be handled. Like that was
Yep.
a level that I had taken it to. And yet I'm hearing a lot of rigor in what you're describing here. And you talk about like, oh, we're social scientists. We're like, we're all social scientists. I'm like, yeah, I'm a social scientist. Then you start talking, I'm like, nah, they're social scientists. Like, they're really doing the thing here. Like I'm experimenting with like I just gotta try things out, you know. Like they have the controls, they have the control, like the the data, like the structured data, that like, but it's invigorated. And I want to just make sure I slow down a little bit here because it is your world. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding some of the term, like the terminology, and taking it out of what I think you're saying and just getting really real with what it is. Because what I'm also hearing is like, here goes a potential roadmap to, and I love this language, creating something that's never been created before. Creating something out of nothing. I'll probably, if you don't mind, I'll probably start using that going forward because I think it's just like,
Absolutely. It's yours.
thank you. That's like, it's ours, right? But it's like, it's the thing that I think most describes what's like what I'm about. Right? It's like there's something that's been waiting for you. There's there's a Niiamah sized space in the universe. Can you go step in it and then go do what comes from there? So first question here is around the structured data, right? So you talked about we had to structure the data, we were structuring the data. You brought it up a number of different times. I started to get it, I think, when you started bringing in the keyword components, like but if you can make that really real for us, what was on your mind? What does structuring data mean for you, maybe in the context of what it was back then, and maybe if you're like with some things that you're doing now, like how might that apply now, where we can see like this is where it was when we were starting, this is some things we're thinking about, but even now as we take on projects, like we're still potentially thinking about it.
Absolutely. So most podcasters don't think about it because we think of podcasting as just the audio recording that goes out, and most people put it on other people's platforms. Because we built from scratch, there was stuff we had to consider, so it added an element of additional work, but it also gave us an incredible education. And so when you think about structured data, think about the relationship of that podcast to a website. Right. And so we were building up not just the podcast, but we were using the podcast to build up the website. It was essentially acting like we had a bunch of contributors writing articles for us for a website.
Gotcha.
And so we like quadruple tapped the content essentially.
Yep. Okay.
I know, brilliant,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
get this, so you're gonna like this too, from that outlier perspective. We were going to these podcast conferences. Neva and I were both icons of influence at a podcast event, like repeatedly. And I sat there and was listening to people like, you need to have a big microphone, you need to have all of these, like all of these elements that people kept talking about. Your problem's going to be with the guests. You're gonna like, I just listened and listened to all of the pain points that people were talking about. Meanwhile, we were in the background going, I don't think you have to do it this way, because we were on a totally different mission. And so early on, I looked at some of the people that I wanted to interview, and there was no way they were going to adhere to microphone guidelines. And I'm like, what's more important to me? Like getting them on a phone? Like, I'm like, you could even call in, and that we started with free conference call, right? Like that was how we did it, on phones. And I was like, I believe that if the energetics of the conversation are good enough, people will forgive us the audio quality. And it was more important to get that information from some of these brilliant minds. Um, I've interviewed Irvin Laszlo out of Hungary like 4 different times, and it's like he's 90 some years old. I'm like, I don't care if you have to send a homing pigeon. I just want to hear what you've been working on, right? And so we were always against the grain, and we didn't have any numbers. So we looked kind of silly, and it's like, what are you doing? You got your kid in tow, and she looked cool because she was 7, and so it's like whatever she was doing, it was pretty remarkable. But I'm like, no, really, I think this will work. And you just got to kind of stick it out and have faith in it until it does work. And as soon as it did work, we were sitting really pretty, right? We were looking pretty brilliant. But it took that fortitude, and it was tough, man. It was tough to sit there, and everything about us was different. But we were convinced that we were on the right track, at least for us, right? But most people in podcasting are looking at, getting ranked on Apple, or getting ranked on this, or getting ranked on this, and that's that competitive feel. Our entire shtick was collaboration. So it's like we don't want to play those games anyway. And so we only tracked the numbers until we knew the model worked. And then beyond that, what ended up happening was, of course, the website picked up steam. So the website's incredibly valuable. But it wasn't just for those numbers, it was also kind of cohering the entire big vision. And podcasting was just a small piece of it. We didn't expect it to be that successful. We had no celebrity, we had no external, we didn't pay for marketing, we did nothing. We just built a model because we built it from scratch. We understood that there's nothing magical about podcasting. We understood the mechanics behind it, and paired up with a website that was also gaining traffic was a pretty powerful combination. I will also mention that most people who do podcasts pair it up with social media. We weren't trusting those social media platforms. We had clients as corporate in our corporate counter intel business who lost $1 million one night because Google or Facebook decided to change their group algorithms. Like, it was like, no thanks, we didn't trust anybody else's platforms because they were free platforms that other people control, right? And so you always had to think about, why are they in it, right? They're responsible to their advertisers, their shareholders. They're not worried about your podcast and that you have blood, sweat, and tears poured into it. It's just done, right? There's nothing you can do about it. And so we were playing a long game. And it takes a little bit of a different sort of edginess to be able to do that.
I think it takes a little bit more than just a little bit, like, because there's like, I hear the long game here, and I recognize now that we haven't gone back to your story. I think it'd be all right for us to continue down this thread right now, but I do want to just
Absolutely, yeah.
like just acknowledge that there's because as you're talking, I'm becoming more fortified, if I'm being very honest, right? And I think that's important here, where I'm like, I find that if I am myself am not fully engaged in the conversation, for me, then we miss things out. We like things get missed out here. So one of the things that I'm hearing, all right, I'll tell you what's going on for me. In a few days, we're about to launch a brand new way of us serving people. For a number of years, I've done one-on-one coaching, and in 2023, at the beginning of 2023, I accidentally blew up my business. I didn't know I was doing it. I just said I'm going to write a book. And then I wrote a book, and then it came out, and like I had it. We have 200 pages sitting there, and it's literally, I dictated it because I did it my way. I dictated it. Someone came in, like these are all my words, but I don't feel anything. Like, I don't feel like this is like
Hmm.
actually like the oomph of it all. And it took me down this journey to like just say, like, wait a minute, how do I actually build something that like is even less reliant on me, even though I don't mind being completely there for it. Like, but if the only way that if someone's gonna get results, is like Niiamah happened to figure out the one thing, and like there was something I realized, like, that I wanted to step up the level
Hmm.
significantly. And as you're talking here, like we're about ready to hit launch and be launched by the time people listen to this episode. But the in that pre-stage, there's a lot of, am I working too hard? Everyone else, like the a prior version of me could have just gotten this out in a day. Why has it been nine months since we've done it, right? And in that place, I'm like, I accidentally blew up the business because I didn't mean to do that, right? I didn't mean to take like step back for 9 months. That was not the intention. But there's something here around seeing the larger vision, and what my interpretation of like where you're going with structured data and how you're able to use that to fuel the website, and how the website then fueled back into the podcast, and like it was just creating this great like recurring cycle where everything was virtuous. Like, one thing was
Hmm.
improving the other, which was only improving the other, which then went back and gave it in. And I'm as I hear you right now, it's making me think, actually, what's going on through my mind is like, oh, it's gonna work. The plan I have in mind is like, oh, it's gonna work. It may not work right away, right? And I think this is why I'm so fascinated when you say like experiments and looking at it from a science perspective, because I'm like, the system, we need, like, there's work to do. You said like we kept doing it. We tracked the data to understand what was working with the model, something to that extent, like to like perfect the model. And then once you get the
Hmm.
model, you're like, this is working. Let's just go out and just do it. Um, I think that in hearing what you're saying, I'll put it in this case, in hearing what you're saying, uh, it is bringing up an alignment within me of like, okay, I'm making a big play right now, and it feels like a lot bigger than I need to. and most other people are able to go just show up in this way. And I could do that because I have been doing it, but there's something much larger that may be available for people on a deeper level of service that sets up a stronger foundation for everything else that comes out from it.
Mm.
And I just want to just like reflect back to you, like, thank you, because in this moment of uncertainty, before I hit go, and while I'm still in the, is this, can I go with this stage? This conversation is deeply serving in that regard. And I want to make sure you know it. But I'm also going to keep pulling out along that line and keep pulling some of those threads here because I see it. I see what it's like to build an actual system and a model and say, like, it's not just about doing the work. It's about being able to make sure that the work can be done on an ongoing basis and other people can find it and grow from it, and we can keep growing. I just see it. I see what you're doing. I see what you've invested in, and not only does it make sense, I'm just really grateful that you have done it. So let me put that into space here. I just need to just call all that into this moment right now.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you for the reflection. It's appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, so we're coming up on time here. So we're gonna start wrapping up the conversation. The Tell me where things, so we spent time with how things got started, right? Um you got a superpower kids, you're like, that was the second show on the network. How many shows are you at now?
Oh my goodness. Well, we started paring down, and I'll tell you why. I mean, at one time I think we had, my husband could tell you more, but probably 15, 20. But not just the shows, it's the properties that we have across the podcasting space. So we have channels, we have the network itself, and then we have all the spin-off shows. And so that was, over time we tested many different things. And we once we knew that we could duplicate, kind of quadruple tap that content, like I said, we wanted to see what we could do with each individual episode across podcasting. And podcasting is such an amazing space because it's a passive anonymous activity, right? People can just listen. And so the ability to get it out as much as possible, to take an episode and say, hey, it kind of falls within this show, but it also fits this category. So like we have Superpowers of the Soul is one of our shows, but it's also a channel we have. And so the channel is a compilation of any episode on any of our shows that relates to that topic. So people want to search, similar to like archives on an internet,
Yes.
same concept. We weren't sure we could pull that off. We pulled it off. And
Nice.
so it's stuff like that. But what I'm most excited about is that my background's in intercultural communication and critical race theory, which nobody knew about, when I was teaching it back in the 90s, but now
Mhm.
everybody knows about it. But what I've always been looking for is how to be responsible with power and privilege, right? Why systems of privilege fail every time, right? They self-destruct because they have to, right? And how do we build without succumbing to that temptation? And so the initial model was sort of a pay to play kind of concept. And what we're doing now is moving that, migrating it into, essentially, we have this positioning, and we're about to open up this positioning to others for that social impact ability. And so we're migrating the model to be able to serve as underrepresented voices. And that thrills me to no end, um, because we see that we had a unique positioning, right? We were able to do this. We were able to do this with our daughter. We, because of our careers and because of our educations and everything else, we were able to sit here and take the time to construct this, and to be able to open that up. We wanted to create business models that encourage other businesses to think about things like access and inclusion, and recognizing privilege where it exists, and saying, okay, it exists. How do we use it for good, essentially? Using our superpowers for good has always been, that's the question I ask now, is what are your superpowers and how are you using them for good? And where we feel like we can make the biggest impact right now is sharing our success. And so we're in talks with a number of different entities to see what model can we put in place that doesn't, because there's really no business in podcasting unless you're selling advertising slots, and we didn't want to commoditize our listeners. We've never sold advertising slots on our podcast. We've tried a few different versions of like featuring people and this and that, but the pay to play model for our guests or for our listeners really never sat well with us. And so we were always in this pursuit of how do we devise something that allows for others to be heard, other stories, right? In a way that is rich, and we're seeing it again since the pandemic. This whole world just broke wide open, and the receptivity factor for this plan is ready now. And so to be able to sit here and say our goal was to not just turn our model over, right? I call it the 10-year turnover, right? Building something up successfully, but then turning it over to be of use in the world in a way that's beneficial to all of us, to a global humanity, but finding models that are profitable, that work, that are sustainable, so other businesses can follow in our footsteps. And so that's the phase that we're in now, and it feels like it took us a lifetime to get here, but I'm very pleased to say that we're here now, and that's what we're exploring. So stay tuned for what comes next from the Superpower Network. But it's again another radical move on our part. But we're positioned to make radical moves. We have the privilege and the power to do it, so we're going to do it.
Yes, yes, indeed. I just want to say thank you for that, and thank you for wielding your power, wielding your privilege. I think that like I have a fundamental belief that everyone has privilege, and they just don't know how, where, or how, or like what to do with it. And so I deeply respect you for choosing to do things with it, and leveraging it to the extent that you can. I'm excited for what comes next, and definitely looking forward to help in any way that I can around that. Okay?
Brilliant. Thank you. We appreciate that. We're gonna need all the help we can get,
You
and
got it.
I can tell during this conversation that you're a player in that space. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's do this here. We're gonna close here. I like to close with two questions. The first one is, for anyone that wants to continue down this journey with you, for anyone that's like that's, yeah, what's the best way for them to continue down the journey with you?
You can find the Superpower Network on all of the major podcast players and most of the minor ones. And so, just check it out, listen, see if you like it. And you can always go to superpowerexperts.com. We do have some courses if you want to kind of know what we did, master your personal power course and stuff like that. But just sit in our space, right? Trust yourself, trust your intuition, follow your path. And if it resonates with you, then you'll know how to connect with us. But we're pretty easy to find out there. So enjoy what's out there, and feel free to listen and consume. And if you want to reach out, please reach out to us.
Lovely. And then the second thing here then is that I call it the time capsule question. And the question here, Tonya, is like, you have your experience right now on this planet, right? And you're going to have more experience in a few years, but there's probably something that you know right now that a future you might need to be reminded of. What's that thing that you know now that you'd like to leave as a message for yourself, for a future Tonya later?
What a great question. Patience, and enjoy the ride.
Well, with that, I want to say thank you for creating what you create. Thanks for reminding me that I'm a creator, and speaking in that language. I'm like, oh, everything makes sense when you come from the lens of this. I acknowledge you and respect you for what you and your whole family has created and what you're creating on top of that. And I'm just really excited for wherever this journey goes from here. Right. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.